Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israeli spyware developer NSO responds to the latest reports of abuse of their Pegasus software. Meanwhile, the rabbinate pushing back against a new proposal for reforming the process of getting kosher certifications. And finally, at long last, high-speed connectivity reaching the outer edges of Israeli society. Stay tuned for the details. Israel-based spyware developer NSO now responding to the latest controversy involving its Pegasus software. A massive leak of over 50,000 alleged targets of the invasive malware, including activists, journalists, government officials, political dissidents, world leaders, and even royalty. NSO's response, though, quote, that this list has nothing to do with us. Moreover, in a rare moment of open dialogue, NSO chief Shalev Julio saying that the unsourced list is itself suspect. Julio explaining that NSO was contacted by several information brokers over a month ago who claimed to have evidence of the list being leaked from NSO servers in Cyprus. But Julio says that no such servers exist, and that after reviewing the contents with NSO's clients, it became clear that this was an HLR lookup server that has nothing to do with NSO. Still, there's clearly much more to the story than meets the eye. And joining me now to discuss is legal counsel for the Israeli digital rights movement, attorney Jonathan Klinger. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us. Now, let's assume that NSO is telling the truth. What are the steps to verifying NSO's theory? And what does this say about the evidence that the international press is publishing?
So there are two sides to this story. The first is NSO's side, which, by the way, may be true, but it doesn't mean that the other side is wrong. The HLR lookup could have came from any of NSO's clients or aggregated from a few clients, meaning that NSO specifically had no knowledge of this, but their clients were bad actors. Now, if someone abused NSO's systems, NSO most likely wouldn't have full control over this. The reason is because if I run a clandestine service, I wouldn't want an Israeli company to have full access to my spyware program and to my way of deploying it. Think of it. A lot of these governments, which some of them don't even have official diplomatic relationship with Israel, might say, I don't know if NSO has a mole working for the Israeli intelligence and looking out for Israel's interest while they help us. So if they had purchased some software for NSO, they most likely wanted to have something isolated without access to NSO inside. So NSO wouldn't be able to fully verify the claims on one hand. Also, both Amnesty and Citizen Lab showed the full verification process. They explained how they verified the claims. They took a number, I think it was a bit more than 60 phones from the people on that list, which is, of course, less than a fraction of a percent, but that's what they obtained. And around half of them were either with some presence or with attempted presence of spyware, which most likely could have been NSO, but this doesn't mean that it was from the government that these people reside in. As we saw yesterday in that list, there were French dignitaries, including Emmanuel Macron. However, they were not spied on by the French authorities, but by others, by people from, according to the publication yesterday, from Morocco, meaning that once I, as a country, even if I'm democratic or less than democratic, receive a copy of that software, I can track everyone worldwide, not just in my country.
All right, now whether the list leaked from NSO or not, NSO and Pegasus have been in a controversial spotlight for years. Analysts like Ben Yamini are calling NSO a black mark on Israel's startup resume and identity. The Israeli government has also now appointed a special team to look into how to handle the fallout of NSO's controversies, specifically allegations that Pegasus was abused by certain governments to target politicians, journalists, etc. Do you think that we need to enact heavy limits on the types of software that NSO sells and to whom, or even ban the sale of this type of software outright?
NSO is not alone here. Israel has a vast network of different companies that provide offensive cyber tools. NSO is just one of them. And NSO is working within the boundaries of Israeli law. The problem is that the regulators are not that concerned about it. And according to the articles in Haaretz and Ynet this morning, the government may have used NSO as a tool to promote relations with other countries. They stole them the ability to have this defensive or offensive tool in order to improve countries' security, and on the other hand, that way routed our diplomatic relations. Now, the problem is that NSO also has good uses. It may be used to stop pedophiles, terrorists, maybe drug dealers. Now, if I want a software that will harm bad people and stop them from committing crimes, I have to regulate how the software is used and not whether it's available or not available at all. In order to do that, we need to decide how we decide on who gets to have this. Would it be only liberal democracies, as I really prefer, with real safeguards and with real transparency? Or can we sell to, let's say, less than fully liberal democracies, countries like Hungary, which does have an official democratic regime, but is not that keen on civil rights? On the same way, we can see whether Brazil is such a democracy. Other countries like India, which is a full democracy with civil rights, may be great, but the problem is that we have to make sure that the NSO tool and similar tools may only be used inside the country that these security services purchase it for, meaning that I don't know if the person who spied on India was the Indian National Security Agency or someone else from another country. In order to make sure that this doesn't happen, NSO's tools need to be, let's say, reprogrammed to only allow countries to use it for inside their own boundaries.
All right, Jonathan Klinger, thank you so much.
Thank you again for inviting me over.
Moving on, since the start of the COVID pandemic, scientists have been hard at work trying to either treat or vaccinate against the still spreading virus. But what if existing drugs already hold the key? It's a burning question that many have asked and that Israeli researchers now may have answered. Scientists from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem are now saying that they've identified 18 drugs that could actually treat, if not quote-unquote cure, COVID-19 patients. The list reportedly including a treatment for atherosclerosis and another for the treatment of cancer. Professor Shai Arkin, a biochemist in the Alexander Zilberman Institute of Life Science, explains that over 2,800 different approved-for-use compounds were tested against COVID-infected cells, and that 18 of them, quote, exhibited remarkable potency against the whole virus in vitro experiments, end quote. In fact, Arkin reporting that almost 100% of the treated cells lived despite being infected, whereas without the pre-existing drug compounds, roughly half of the infected cells died. Still, despite the incredible potential, Arkin is keeping the names of these drugs pretty close to the vest. He argues that he cannot make any proper recommendations until they've at least gone through some clinical trials. And in other COVID news, daily infections in Israel now topping 1,400, over 10% of which are coming from abroad, including from supposedly safe countries. Perhaps then, in attempts to make it easier to stay local, the Israeli COVID cabinet is looking for strategies to open and manage cultural events. Chana Rivkin with the details.
המטרה פה היא להבין את העולם שלכם וביחד לחשוב על דרכים איך מצד אחד אנחנו לא מאפשרים לעולם התרבות להפוך למדגרה להדבקה של קורונה, ומצד שני לאפשר להמשיך לתת תרבות, להמשיך לעבוד, להמשיך לחיות. המגמה שלנו כממשלה היא הפעם לעשות הכל, לא לסגור שום דבר, כלום, ולאפשר למדינה להמשיך לפעול לצד הקורונה.
Prime Minister Naftali Bennett meeting with representatives of the Israeli culture sector at Habima Theater in Tel Aviv. The meeting focusing on finding effective means of keeping the public happy and entertained while safe behind COVID regulations. And in coordination with Culture and Sports Minister Yechiel Troper, as well as Health Minister Nitzan Horowitz, the attendees providing suggestions on how to move forward. Among them, a potential return to the Green Pass system and a focus on mask enforcement and other, quote, common sense regulations. Troper, for one, saying, quote, "We are not here to close things down, but neither are we here to close our eyes." Then Health Minister Horowitz likewise stressing the importance of transparency and cooperation between the government and the public, explaining that the government neither wants to nor intends to impose restrictions without an open dialogue. Meanwhile, theater fans not the only ones standing to benefit from the new initiative either. The culture and entertainment industry among the hardest hit by the pandemic and also the slowest to recover.
Speaking of regulations, the Religious Affairs Ministry is now unveiling a new proposal that would heavily reform the system of kosher certifications here in Israel. If passed, private agencies overseen by the chief rabbinate would be empowered to provide eateries with a kosher stamp of approval. The idea being that the rabbinate would still ultimately retain oversight, while competition between certification providers would drive down the costs, raise standards, and help prevent corruption. Still, many in the rabbinate's office and the Haredi public at large are upset. So here to discuss is former Yesh Atid Party Knesset member Rabbi Dov Lippman. Rabbi Lippman, of course, it's always great to have you back. It's been argued that this is a war on religious services with the goal of canceling the Jewish identity of the state. How do you respond?
It's actually just the opposite. It's shocking to even hear that said. The idea of giving over the kashrut services to a local level, where rabbis at a local level, under the auspices of the chief rabbinate, can assess the needs of their city and perhaps enable even more people in the city to be under the guide and the watchmanship of the oversight of kashrut responsible rabbis. That's a brilliant idea, that more people can be eating kosher in Israel. Yes, it's true, Aaron, that they might rely on more lenient opinions within the world of Jewish law, but that's okay. There are lenient opinions out there that are real legitimate opinions that can enable more people to be observing kashrut and also make sure that there's less corruption because of the oversight on the local level.
Well, so have you heard of maybe some more legitimate arguments against this proposal, though?
The fear that you're hearing mostly from the ultra-Orthodox politicians is that on the local level, perhaps people will break beyond halacha, and therefore maybe the kashrut rules will not really be followed. There's also some criticism of the possibility of certain eateries getting kashrut rights, even though they're open on the Shabbat. These are all issues which, again, I truly believe people on a local level can understand what does their community need. I want to remind you and all the viewers that when the chief rabbinate was initially established, the concept wasn't cut people out, let's be strict. The concept was, let's create this big umbrella under the framework of religious observance to enable as many Israelis as possible to be part of it. So this reform, which by the way is headed by a religious minister who's suggesting it, is saying, let's give it to the local level under the auspices of the chief rabbinate. Rabbis on a local level can make decisions that are based on the needs of their areas and enable more people to be eating out at places that have kosher supervision.
All right, so I want to get a little bit more about some of the gray areas that you talked about, but in just a second. First, I want to ask you, what does the current system of maintaining a kosher certification in Israel actually look like? And what are the most common issues that you hear about? And finally, do you think that this new initiative would better address those issues?
So the way it works right now is essentially, if you want to have it under the state auspices, it's under just the blanket chief rabbinate. There are a few other more stringent kashrut agencies which charge a lot of money, and companies, restaurants can't even keep up with it. But the ability to really supervise properly when it's on a national level is very, very difficult. We just had a tragedy not so long ago where in a meat restaurant there was a dairy dessert which actually led to to a horrible tragedy for someone who couldn't have dairy. How is there a dairy dessert in a meat restaurant? It's because of the lack of proper supervision. So this will accomplish, number one, the most important thing is the control on the local level, real supervision for a kosher laws, for someone who's caring about the religious side, but it'll also prevent prices that require restaurants to pay high amounts of money. Now there'll be competition because you'll have local agencies competing for the rights to give the kashrut. I think that's a positive thing, that the prices will go down for people who want to have kosher eateries instead of having to pay high amounts, which prevents people from actually having kosher supervision.
All right, so again, reading further now into this plan, back to some of the complaints. One of the policies reportedly includes the ability to approve of quote-unquote lower-level kashrut, including restaurants that serve technically kosher food, but which are open on the Sabbath. Can you really grade kashrut on a sliding scale, or is it more black and white like many of the critics of this proposal might suggest?
If one would open some of the books that I have behind me, some which deal with kashrut, you're going to find such a wide range of opinions about all the laws, from more stringent to more lenient, all dating back hundreds of years. Yes, many people in the Orthodox sector try to keep to the more stringent rules, and that everyone can choose to do so in their lives, and any restaurant can choose to do so. But the ability to give restaurants the option of being kosher, of being certified as kosher, while relying on some of the more lenient opinions that are legitimate opinions, even if we don't generally rely on them, that could be very positive. Now, about the question about Shabbat, is there a direct link? And now we're getting back into the study halls of yeshiva and trying to understand, is there an actual Jewish law which says that you can't have kosher supervision if it's open on Shabbat? That's something which could be debated. And by the way, I do understand those who would say we don't want to do so. But if there's an area of Israel where there are more people will be eating kosher food, even if that eatery happens to open on Shabbat, the idea that a board of 3 local rabbis, under the auspices of the chief rabbinate, can allow it is something which I am totally comfortable with. And I would hope that people who understand that the goal is people who want to feel connected Jewishly, want to be keeping some level of halakha of Jewish law, will be doing so to give that opportunity, again, with the oversights that I just mentioned that will be in place.
Rabbi Dov Lippman, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you.
All right, and if you'd like to see my full interview with Rabbi Dov Lippman, please check it out online at ILTV.tv or on our ILTV YouTube and Facebook channels. Now, turning to the Muslim tradition, some 100,000 Muslim worshippers, including many from the West Bank, seen praying at the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount on Tuesday morning. The massive crowds arriving to celebrate the holiday of al-Adha, with face painting, prayers, parades, and charitable acts. And the atmosphere, especially electric, as the 4-day festivities in 2020 were largely scaled down because of coronavirus. Then worshippers later expected to hit the streets of the nearby markets to buy gifts, sweets, and more. Of course, some were using the occasion to incite as well. A large banner was seen hung outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque in support of Hamas, and the crowd at one point was chanting, quote, "We shall sacrifice our lives for Al-Aqsa." The Temple Mount complex and the mosque that sits atop it have been a long-disputed flashpoint location, often used as a reason to jumpstart conflict. Moving on, for years, both public and private initiatives have been hard at work at trying to bring developments to the areas of Israel's periphery. But basic infrastructure has long been lagging behind the demand, at least until now. A historic announcement on Tuesday from Ma'alot, the northern Israeli town now becoming the latest in the periphery to receive lightning-fast connectivity via fiber optic cables. And far from the only one to benefit, over 1 million periphery households already updated, and with 60,000 more connected each month. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Communications Minister Yoaz Hendel expressing the importance behind this achievement, calling this a connection not just of cables, but of Zionist values, and on the same level as extending water or electricity services.
בעצם מה שאנחנו עושים, אנחנו מחברים עיר אחרי עיר לסיבים אופטיים עד הבית, כדי שהאינטרנט יהיה סופר מהר, יהיה אפשר לעבוד מהבית באיכות הכי גבוהה, כאילו אתם יושבים בעיר ניו יורק. המשמעות היא דרמטית.
Meanwhile, speaking as a former high-tech CEO, Bennett adding that aside from benefiting Israel by reducing highway congestion or air pollution, the initiative will also draw a new opportunity away from the crowded center regions.
המשמעות היא אדירה. זה אומר באמת שילד במעלות יוכל לזכות באותה רמת שירות וחינוך אונליין של ילד במרכז. זה אומר שבאמת אפשר להקים פה חממות סטארט-אפ וסטארט-אפים שיכולים לעבוד בזמן אמת. זה אומר שרופא יכול לשבת במעלות ולנהג ציוד מרחוק בבית חולים בדטרויט.
All right, our final topic tonight. As supporters of Israel continuing to face off against anti-Israel delegitimization campaigns on college campuses across the U.S., a group of 40 student leaders beyond the Jewish faith have arrived in Israel as part of the Jewish National Fund USA's Caravan for Democracy student leadership mission to Israel. The unique mission allowing student leaders to explore Israel's diverse melting pot of peoples, as well as the issues that matter them most, and through meetings with political, cultural, and community leaders from all different backgrounds and faiths. Joining us in the studio to share their experiences from this year's JNF USA Caravan for Democracy Student Leadership Mission are Lexi Deutsch from Regis University in Colorado and Miguel Acosta Loza from Gonzaga University in Washington State. Thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So first of all, I'm very excited to have you here and to hear about your experiences in Israel. So that is my first question. What is your first impression, really, since landing in Israel, and how do they compare to maybe some of the preconceptions that you had? Miguel, if you want to start.
I think Israel is a rainbow nation. Like, that's the first impression that I ever had. It's amazing. My mother tongue is Spanish, and I thought that I would never get to use it here. I talked to a Mexican Jew a few days ago. I talked to another person from Egypt who happens to speak Spanish too. So I mean, it's just a diversity. And this is well beyond a melting pot. This is, every person can be their own person.
Interesting.
I think that's one of the things that's impressed me as well, is just how diverse and how just lively everything is here. I had maybe heard some not great conceptions when I was home, especially lately in the news, but that's not at all what I've seen here. Everyone's happy and thriving, and it's really, truly beautiful here.
Would you say that you've seen like a side of Israel that perhaps is not shown in your news? Like something that was really just totally new to you?
Daily life.
Really?
As simple as that, daily life. I took a class on the Arab-Israeli conflict, and never we got into food, we never got into culture, we never got into what does a daily Israeli life look like. Yeah. And this is what we're getting to see now. It's amazing.
Wow. I agree with that. Even today, just going to a small restaurant here that's, family restaurant where their family came here from the 1880s and has just lived there. Or a couple days ago, we got to go to a pool in a kibbutz and just getting to dance with 8- and 9-year-olds and just kind of have the daily life piece that you don't see very often.
All right, so I've got dancing with 8- and 9-year-olds, and I've got going to restaurants. Hit me with some more highlights of this trip. Go ahead, Lexi.
I am someone who comes from the Christian faith, so I think seeing the Christian holy sites has been something that I've really cherished, just getting to come and deepen my faith here in that way and be in the places I've read about in scriptures has been really special for me.
Yeah, learning more about accessibility in Israel, sustainability. It's amazing in how the technology world has evolved so much in this part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you hope to come away with from this visit most, I should ask?
A story. That's what I want to come off of. From here, it's a story and being able to tell my own experience. Of course, we came with JNF, but we are not told what to think. We are here to make and come to our own conclusions.
Yeah.
I think, again, a very similar answer of just being able to go home and go back to our campuses and our friends, and when we hear things on the news, well, maybe that's not what I saw, and just kind of appreciating even the diversity amongst the other students that are here. Everyone asks such great questions. I feel like I don't speak enough because I just keep hearing these questions and get thinking, and continue to think about these home and be able to learn as much as I can from the people here and the cultures here.
All right, well, first of all, just on a personal note, as we mentioned earlier, I know how much pressure there is, honestly, and so I want to applaud you both just for coming and exposing yourself, seriously, because not everybody's willing to open themselves to that experience. And so thank you both so much for coming in, and thank you for coming to the studio.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.3 shekels to the American dollar and 2.6 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.